Welcome, everyone, to the Spooky Screen. We are five best friends who like to talk and review horror movies in theaters and on streaming. Tonight, we'll be discussing a movie in theaters called Barbarian. Barbarian was directed by Zach Kreger. It kind of popped up out of nowhere, right, guys? Like, I hadn't
Yeah,
heard anything about Barbarian until like a week before the fact, and they're like, "Oh, this movie is coming out next week, and it's horror, and it's great, and you should watch it." And I was like, "Oh," and I was like,
I
"Okay, I'm really interested."
I saw one trailer when we went to go see Nope,
Okay.
and then nothing else.
So yeah, Barbarian. Let's jump right into it. Barbarian is a hard R-rated horror movie that came out a week ago. Tess is a post grad young adult with a job interview lined up tomorrow, and she arrives at her Airbnb only to find that a guest has already checked in, and she, despite her best judgment, decides to enter and spend the night at the place with this stranger who welcomes her in. But it turns out that the stranger is the least of her worries. There is something much more sinister and evil lurking beneath the house. All right, so we're gonna do our whiteboard review. It's pay in theaters or pay on VOD, stream or skip. So, all right, ready? Everyone's ready?
yeah.
Yep.
All right, three, two, one. All right, I have three pays. And just to clarify, no, would you be a pay in theater or a pay on VOD?
You know, if I could only see this in VOD, because you know me, I'm a theater Puritan. I like going to the theater, I like experiencing movies that way.
Yeah,
But if I could only pay the $20 that they hike it up to for VOD, I would still recommend it.
on
So
VOD.
on VOD, I would for
All right.
$20. I still think it's worth it. Yeah.
Okay, but not theaters.
No, I just mean obviously theaters because I love theaters, but
Oh, okay.
if you could only see it in VOD, I would still recommend it.
Oh, got it. That was a little confusing for me, so I apologize. But that makes sense. Okay. David, pay in
Mhm.
theaters or pay on VOD, what would you prefer? Is there
I saw this in the theaters, and I definitely think that aided to it. I mean, like Noah, I don't always see most the movies in theaters, but I enjoy them when I can see them in theaters. So seeing this movie in the theaters was fun, but like Noah, I would pay to watch it if that was my only option, like
got it.
from home.
That's good to know. And then same with me. I would pay to see this in theaters. Um, but I was seated between a young couple and an older man, and they literally made my in theater experience because, like, we became like the best of friends through this viewing experience. And my in theater experience was so lively and fun that it was hard for me to dislike this film.
Hmm.
I, there are flaws, and we can get into it. I think there are some things that the movie was weak on, but I think overall, yeah, I just had a great time watching this movie with a group of strangers, and that somehow wins out at the end of the day because that's what going to the movies is all about. It's a shared experience. So, David, tell me why you like this movie. Like, can you give me some specific reasons why this one ended up something that you'd be willing to pay for in theaters?
I think one, it was an unconventional story. Um,
In what way?
and it was just a lot of the image of like the new house and the old town were really neat to me. But I think ultimately why I liked it was a really great story. Like I said, it was a unique take on the whole kind of dungeon lost underground trope. Um, I think it was great directing, great writing, great acting. I think everybody that was no one felt out of place, and
It was a sparse cast. It was only like five or six players. Yeah, so this is like a spoiler alert for anyone who's listening. Barbarian is unique, as David describes, in the sense that it uses tension really well and builds up these scenes, and then right at a moment of a big reveal where the tension starts to cut loose, and it starts to go for the scares, it does this sudden left turn away from that scene to something completely different and brings a new
Right.
player into the story. And it does this twice. It does this
Right.
first time to bring in Justin Long's character, who's the owner of the Airbnb, and then the second time it happens, it introduces who the true villain of the movie is.
Right.
And I remember thinking about this and I was like, wow, this is such a jarring cut. No, I don't know if you felt the same way. It's like it could work for some people and make the movie, and for other people, you watch it and it could break the movie for them because it's such a jarring cut. And for me, I think it was creative and bold enough that it worked. David, you're saying that it worked for you,
It,
right?
it worked for me, and I think it worked on me. It worked for me on the strength of what it cut to. You
Right.
know, I can see why people would feel like frustrated when like the tension is at like the highest, and you want to feel that adrenaline and everything's getting very exciting, and you're ready for the big scare, the big chase, and then bam, it cuts.
Yeah.
And I think if it was weak, and I think if they cut to something weak and an actor who was weak and a character that was weak, it wouldn't have worked. But Justin Long's character was so kind of like opposite of the people who we'd been with for the first like 20 minutes. It allowed me to kind of sit back, but I was still anxious. Like I got a breath, but I was like in a haunted house where I was still like
Yeah.
thinking about what I had just seen, like, and when is it going to come back? When is it going to come
Right.
back?
Like how is the director going to connect this
Right, right.
back to the dungeon in the Detroit house? So yeah, Noah, let's pivot to you. What do you have?
Well, I was
I was
just
gonna.
gonna make a comment on the structure
Yeah.
as you guys are talking about it. I just want to make a minor observation. It didn't bother me. Um, I quite enjoyed to see something new. You know, it's always fun to see something new in horror movies, and you don't get to see that much where it's such a jarring cut. But at the same time, I think modern audiences modern audiences have been kind of trained in a way to accept it more, because
Hmm.
if you think about binging, you know, an episode usually ends at like a pivotal moment, like a cliffhanger, and then
Yeah.
a new episode starts and it's almost like a new story, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it gets intertwined into that pivotal cut again. And I think we've been kind of trained to kind of just accept that type of structure now because so many people are binging. I use Stranger Things as an example, right? There'll be a cliffhanger episode, and I'll be right up into the next episode, which will be a completely different story, focused on a completely different character that ends up getting tied up again, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
So I think I don't know if this structure is really going to affect people as much as maybe back in the day it would have, like in the 90s or the 2000s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm trying
I
to
That's an
say.
interesting
completely get
point.
what you're saying. It's like, you're on Netflix, you're binging Breaking Bad, and it ends on a cliffhanger, and then the cold open is like something completely different,
Yeah,
but they figure out a way to weave it back into the story.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
we've been trained now. We've been
It's an
Yeah.
trained to kind
interesting
of
point.
accept that structure.
Yeah.
But I'll move on to why I say pay for this movie, right?
Yeah. Go
Um,
ahead.
I think this movie is making waves, basically, right? It's catching fire. People are loving this movie, and part of me wonders why. But I can say why it worked for me is because you don't really get to see. I feel like I'm going to use the term fun horror, right?
Hmm.
Like this movie could be described as fun horror, but not only is it fun horror, but it's really well made fun
Mhm.
horror.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that doesn't happen anymore. Like it reminded me of an A24 horror movie, and if you've been listening to us, you kind of know what that means, right? It's an A24 horror movie, but high on the drugs that Blumhouse smokes. You know, it's got the quality and care put into the look and execution, right? It looks beautiful. It's filmed like so stylized shots. You
Hmm.
know, it's
Right.
really well done. Um, but like a A24 is. But an A24 doesn't usually have fun with itself, right? Whereas Blumhouse doesn't take itself it
Yeah.
seriously. It's sometimes nonsensical,
Hmm.
but it's always usually fun, right? People go to a Blumhouse to expect a fun horror movie that they don't really have to think too hard. This movie
Mm.
manages to be both of that. Manages to look really good and have kind of a message going for it and be be a deep thinker, but at the same time, it's having a blast doing it and kind of throwing it in your face. Um, I give really high praise to the unpredictability of this movie. I had no idea what was going to happen at every
Yeah.
next second, which I love because I my brain is like wired to try and think of what's going to happen next, and the fact that it kept pulling the rug out from under me was I really enjoyed that. Um, and what really stood out for me was the first act. The first act of this horror movie, which most of the time in horror movies can sometimes be a slog because they're setting up the pieces, right?
Right.
Hmm.
To eventually play out. Like the good stuff doesn't happen until the middle or the end. This movie, the first act is the strongest point of this movie. Like the tension of when she gets to the Airbnb and
Hmm.
you think that Pennywise actor, I can't remember his name. Is it Bill
Bill
Skarsgård?
Skarsgård.
Yeah,
Yep.
Bill
Bill
Skarsgård.
Skarsgård.
Inspired casting, by the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Because he looks creepy. And so, like, the whole tension of him wanting to make her tea, right? He's trying to be this nice guy. And at the same time, we're thinking, oh, he wants to drag her to the basement, right? We're
Right.
immediately thinking that. And just that full 30 minutes of the back and forth, almost this cat and mouse game that's not really existent, but you're,
Yeah.
you're creating it in your brain was awesome. And I love that. I will say, for a flaw for me, those are my high praises and why I say to go pay for it because it's just a blast. The first act is amazing, the best in horror I might have ever seen.
Hmm.
I will say though, when the mystery is revealed, a lot of the enthrallment I had with the movie kind of faded away, and it became more of a standard horror for me. Like who the villain is, right?
Yeah.
Like it kind of
I
actually
see.
became standard horror, and it it was not that it was a not that it was a letdown. I still had so much fun with it. It just wasn't elevated to the heights of my favorite horror ever, right?
I, I
It
think
doesn't stick the landing for
yeah,
me.
it's set like it's like it did all the twirls and flips and jumps, and then you're like stick the landing with this villain or this creature, which again, spoiler alert for everyone, ends up being this horribly disfigured woman who is a product of several generations of rape and incest. It turns out,
Yeah.
um, but it's something we've seen before. That's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, it's like kind of like The Hill Have
Hills
Eyes,
have eyes. Yep.
and
Yeah.
Right.
it kind of creeps into silly territory.
Hmm.
Like the movie's kind of it doesn't take itself seriously. I said that, but then it becomes like almost goofy parody because like
Yeah.
this woman, this inbred woman, is like I think she's like 9 feet tall or something or
It's
8 feet tall.
huge. Yeah.
She's super strong and she can like climb and break through walls, but at the same time she wants to like have a baby and like have it feed on her like disfigured breast, and then it makes like baby baby like caveman like Geico commercial sounds, and it just kind of was a little silly, too silly for me. Like it took me out of it. It kind of drained the tension out of it for me.
I
Once.
think
Yeah.
the one thing I'll add, David, before we quickly flip over to you, is like it didn't do a good enough job of building her character out for me, and I think the movie wanted us to sympathize for her in a way, and obviously by mentioning the fact that she's a product of like just decades of this
Horrible.
horrible things happening below the house. Yes, you have that, but I think it failed to fully kind of flesh out her character. And
Yeah, quickly, I just want to say I'm sure people listening that saw it would say she's not supposed to be the real villain of the movie. It's supposed to be Justin Long, right?
Yeah.
right,
The director who is accused of rape, and he's pretty much a dick through the entire movie, right? That's probably what
yeah,
people would say. He's supposed to be the villain, but it just I don't know. She kills the most amount of people, right?
yeah,
So
Yeah.
it's just like oh, and she's killing our main character who we're rooting for the entire
right,
time.
yeah,
Right.
That's why we say she's the villain. I get that Justin Long is meant to be the villain, but the movie to me doesn't do a good enough job to try and they both felt like the villain. Do you know what I mean? Why would you pay for this movie, Steven?
yeah. Like I said earlier with David, I agree that the structure was inventive enough that it was creative. It kept you on your toes. I thought the first act was incredibly strong. I thought the use of tension and humor was very well done. Tension when it's Bill Skarsgård, it's Pennywise from It, and you're thinking this guy is going to friggin' kill this girl, and this girl is stepping into a hornet's nest and is going to get hurt very badly. There's like all these red flags that she should catch, but she's just kind of going forward, and she knows it. Like you can see her processing it in her head, but she keeps going. Um, and the humor as well. With, I think one of my favorite scenes was like the tape measuring scene.
Oh yeah.
Such a self-centered asshole. Justin Long's character is so self-centered. Like he doesn't care how disgusting or decrepit it is. All he cares about is profit. All he cares about is how does this benefit me. And I thought
Right.
that was the
Yeah.
perfect. Like even though it got a little bit clownish at some points, where I was like, okay, you're surrounded by human cages. Like, are you not? I think at that point he started to realize where he was. But when that tape measure got pulled out of his hand, I was like, that was like one of the best scare scenes of
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
movie. I was like, whew. It's not perfect by any means, but I think it's good enough for you to have like a rip roaring time in the theater. And
Yeah.
that's all we really are looking for, honestly. It's like we're not looking for masterpieces every day. This
Right.
is going to get the job done. And I thought it it had enough there to feel fully realized.
It's a crowd pleaser.
It is,
Right.
yeah.
I will say that um, I was confused with what the movie was trying to say because there was a lot of themes about sexual abuse, right? She's from a controlling relationship, our main character, Tess. Um, I think the director is accused of rape, right? Which he pretty much admits to doing, even though he doesn't think it's rape, right? But it sounds like rape when he describes it to his buddy. And then this guy is kidnapping women and putting them in cages and raping them. And the villain, the evil inbred woman, not evil, the inbred mutated giant woman is the product of sexual abuse, right?
Yeah.
And they end up killing her. So I'm a little confused of what the movie is ultimately trying to say.
I really didn't take away any sort of
You don't think
overall.
they had anything?
I think there were little bits and pieces there, but it kind of like fell to the wayside. Like I realized like Tess in the beginning had these texts coming through on her phone, but that was never really addressed in the rest of the film. It never really
Yeah.
factored in. Um, it was kind of like one of those movies where it was like it maybe didn't have like the room to pursue
Uh huh.
overarching
Right.
message. You know,
Yeah,
it was
wasn't trying to say something.
Yeah. I think
yeah,
it used the subcontext just as like fuel. I don't think it really was like the underlying. I don't think there was an underlying message. At first, when they showed Justin Long's character, I thought he was the ex-boyfriend. I thought he was going to be the ex-boyfriend,
yeah. Me too. That's what I thought.
and I was like, "Oh yeah, he always plays like a skeevy guy."
He
Um,
plays a good dickhead, doesn't
yeah,
he?
he does. I feel like that's like the majority of his roles. I will say, um, I think one big thing that makes a theater experience, especially for a horror movie, can flop for me is when it's just jump scare after jump scare after jump scare, and you get desensitized to it, and the jump scares don't. The setups like tries to jerk you around, and or just the execution is really poor. And I felt every tension that was built in this movie, and when it was released, there was always a reason for it, and it was fun to watch. It gave you anxiety, it gave you adrenaline, like the tape measure scene.
Hmm.
Like that payoff from the whole tape measure setup was great.
Yeah,
A lesser movie would have fumbled it.
yeah, yeah. So Barbarian, I guess like all three of us, we would be willing to pay to see this in theaters. We would
Yeah.
strongly recommend it. It sounds like there were obviously some flaws that we covered, but I don't. Again, I think we're all in agreement about the fact that it doesn't really break the film for us. Like it's still
Yeah.
strong enough to hold up on its own, and it's entertaining enough that you'll have a good time seeing it in theaters. So hopefully everyone listening, you guys go out to your theaters, support this movie, and once you finish watching it, hello Jersey, you come back and let us know what you guys thought on this video or in the reviews wherever you find us. So thanks everyone for listening. This is the Spooky Screen reviewing Barbarian, directed by Zach Kreger, now in
Woo.
theaters. And again, we're on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Live Journal, MySpace, and we're signing off
Hmm.
until next time. Thanks for listening.
Stay spooky.
See you guys.